Welcome back. Today we're going to have a little chat about Space Marine 3. I didn't think I'd be saying that this soon, but there you go. This video is sponsored by Into the AM. We will hear a little more from them in a few minutes. But for now, look at this. So, Space Marine 3 is officially in development. Now, this is not necessarily a surprise. Let's say that right now. I'm not sitting here going, I cannot believe that they would dare put out another one after the fact that the second one practically printed money like there was no tomorrow for them. That bit's not surprising. It's more that they've revealed it this early that's kind of surprised me. But they have Space Marine 3 officially in development, and it's not going to be anytime soon. I mean, they're announcing it, but it's not like it's going to be out tomorrow, which I think is an important thing to say before we have a little chat about what could possibly be contained therein. They have said it's going to have an all-new immersive campaign and multiplayer modes, but we'd expect that anyway, surely. They wouldn't just re-release the second one, but slightly updated. Well, I say that. That's how the FIFA franchise has worked for approximately the last 20 years. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility, but I doubt it for this specific one, you know? Worry not though, if you're thinking to yourself, but Space Marine 2 isn't that old, are they replacing it now? No. As they say right here, it's likely years away from release, but there's still years of support for Space Marine 2, which, just as well really, especially since they haven't yet implemented the best part of Space Marine, which was the Horde mode. And I will die on that hill. I don't care what you think. The Exterminatus mode was fantastic, and I demand it be implemented right now. I mean, it's going to be really soon, so there's no point getting all stroppy now, but still, there's a lot of life left in Space Marine 2. I do like the statement here of, we have been honoured by the incredible response from fans following the launch of Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. I mean, you should not be surprised by that. I mean, people have been waiting. We've been waiting a long time. The first game was really goddamn good, and then it was just years of nothing due to bankruptcy and all sorts of issues. We will continue to support the game with exciting content and regular updates, blah blah blah. Today we are thrilled to announce that the adventure will continue with Space Marine 3. Players can look forward to an immersive campaign, a multiplayer mode, just the one, and innovations that will redefine the standards of third-person action games. That's an interesting statement. I actually quite like that that's been put in there, because that's intriguing in some ways. We view this as an opportunity to create a true love letter to the Warhammer 40,000 universe, which I'd argue they did a pretty good job of that with Space Marine 2, to be honest. I also love this because I don't think it's meant to read sarcastic, but it kind of does read sarcastic. Do you love press releases? Well, we've got a treat for you. Everyone loves press releases, surely. We all love it. We love a press release. I know that's not what they were going for, but I don't know, maybe just I felt particularly British in that moment and was like, that feels very sarcastic. Probably not the case. But Space Marine 2, obviously massively successful. Space Marine 1 was a fan favourite. Now the third one has been announced, there's a few things that I would quite like them to both do and not do when it comes to this sequel. And we're going to talk about that after this. This video is sponsored by Into the AM, and you may well have seen me wearing some Into the AM t-shirts once or twice during my videos. In fact, that's a massive understatement because I wear Into the AM stuff pretty much every single day of my life. To be fair, it's only because I really like the designs, I really like the fit and finish, and I like how comfortable they are. So really, it would be daft for me not to wear it all the time, wouldn't it? What you may not know is that at the end of last year, Into the AM dropped a bunch of new designs, including this one, which is a new personal favourite, and this one, I love a good wolf, and 6 more, one of which I do have but is in the wash because I wore it yesterday and I should have not done that. I should have saved it for filming this, but no, I had to put it on. Now, of course, if you're looking at all of those and thinking, is there something a little bit more understated? Well, there's also plain tees as well, plus plain hoodies and pretty much every other item of clothing that you could possibly imagine. And if you use my link to buy from Into the AM today, you will get a 10% discount. You can find it in the description and the pinned comment down below. Thank you very much to Into the AM for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. Alright, so the hardest working Space Marine in the Imperium, Titus, will most likely be back Space Marine 3. I'm assuming that the most disliked Space Marine outside of Erebus in the 41st millennium will also be back in the form of Leandros. But there are a few things that I would really, really like them to steer clear of and also kind of implement early on when it comes to Space Marine 3. And it seems daft to wishlist at this stage, but I'm still playing Space Marine 2. Yes, the campaign felt like a very familiar retreading of old ground. You have this planet is in trouble, or these planets are in trouble, and it's Xenos. Except wait, it was Chaos all along. That's fine, but that has formed the basis of quite a few stories in the 41st millennium, and it's something that if you've read enough of the books and kind of done enough of just looked at enough of the lore as a whole, it gets a little bit repetitive. That being said, it was a formula that worked well for the first one, and there was such a long gap between the two that bringing it back, that particular sort of type of story, maybe not a big deal to most people. And in fact, I don't think it was a big deal for most people. For most people, it's just, oh my god, we've got this again. This is brilliant because we get to have an updated Space Marine game that I think in many ways is an improvement on the first one. I mean, just when you look at how long it's been and how technology has moved on and how much better things look now for a start, and the fact that it was Saber doing it, which meant that we had all the Horde mechanics that you had from like World War Z, which was a surprisingly fun game, even if it wasn't that popular, a lot of it was a definite upgrade. The story just felt a bit familiar and a bit rote-like for me personally, but the fact is, I'm still playing the game. I haven't stopped playing Space Marine 2. The campaign may not have been like the thing that I got the most out of, but the rest of it I've thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm still playing on the regular. So it's obviously not a bad example of a 40k game. In fact, it's a very, very good example of a 40k game. It also helps that, frankly, it felt very similar to the first one as well, just with a few changes and improvements, which kind of meant that it was easy to get back into. It's got a very satisfying kind of just gameplay style overall. But if we're getting a third one, that means that surely there's room for developments on top of what we got in the second one. And for me personally, one of the main things that I'd quite like to see from the next installment of it, by all means, let's have Titus back. Titus is a really fun character. He's a very interesting character. I also feel kind of bad for him. I think he's due a holiday. He's not had one for some time. I realise Space Marines don't get holidays full stop, but you know what I mean. He's definitely been on the receiving end of an absolutely insane amount of abuse over the years, and it seems to only really get worse when you look at what happened in the Secret Level episode that featured Titus. He's not having a great time of it, and of course, with a third Space Marine game, it's probably going to be quite bad for him again. That being said, he is a one-man powerhouse who I think has got one of the most insane and obscene records of any Space Marine that has ever existed. So there is that. He's clearly up for the job. I'm really hoping that when Titus comes back, we get something that is not a retread of the same story again. I feel like at this point, we've done the it's Xenos, it's actually Chaos thing enough. It would kind of be nice to even reverse it, even have something that is the opposite way round, where you still think you're fighting one enemy, but then it turns out that actually there's something far deeper and more sinister going on. But it doesn't always have to follow the same repetition, right? It doesn't always have to be Xenos first, then Chaos. It could be a bit different. It could be applied differently, which that by itself, just the order in which you fight these things, I think would be something kind of refreshing when you look at the last two games, and a good chunk of stories set in that universe. There's also the thing of, with Space Marine 2 being as popular as it is, and drawing in enough people that weren't previously that fussed about 40k, if it follows the exact same storyline again, but with just different, a different representative faction for the Xenos and then the Chaos side of things, that will probably start to look a little bit lazy, and I would prefer it if people don't decide, oh, it's a rehash game. It's one of those ones where it's the same each time, but it's just a bit updated. Because there's something of a stigma to that, I feel. Something that I'd really like them to properly focus on from the off, and I realise this is going to be heavily dependent on how the Horde mode does in Space Marine 2, is to have that present from the start. The operations are fun. The multiplayer for Space Marine 2 is very fun. But there is something to be said for just standing fast against wave upon wave of enemies, and there's only a few points in those operations where you really get the chance to do that. And it's not the main focus, and it's also built into the fact that if you do not succeed in your stand against these enemies, well, that's the fail state of that level. You get to the end of Inferno and you get absolutely mobbed right at the end. You've played the entire operation, but you didn't succeed it, so you don't get a lot of the rewards. That's it's still a fun part of that level, but it's also a disappointment when you finally do have to concede that things are not going well, which hasn't happened often to me personally, but it is something that's happened. The Horde mode side of things, you don't need to worry about that necessarily, because the whole thing is its own self-contained version of those little last stand style things, which makes it way more fun and a bit less pressure, and was a really fun and interesting feature of the first Space Marine game, and something that I piled a huge amount of time into. I would say that probably out of all the time I spent with the first game, most of it was in that mode. I didn't really play the PvP all that much. I played the campaign through a couple of times, but the rest of it was all stamping orcs to death whilst holding a heavy bolter for the most part. And it was fantastic. And that was actually a really good way of doing the kind of the power fantasy of being a Space Marine and fighting against stuff, I found. The fact is that you're already on another level of ridiculous when it comes to how strong your character is in video games anyway. When it comes to 40k, Titus's his roll of deeds, his big long parchment, his scroll of what he's done, at this point is absurd. But you don't care in the moment, because you are having a blast wading through literal hordes of enemies. That's actually something that I would have loved them to have implemented on day one of Space Marine 2. Now obviously that's not what's happened, and we still don't have it just yet, though it is on its way. That being available straight off the bat for Space Marine 3 would be, frankly, incredible, because I think it's a genuinely brilliant way of making you feel like you're playing a Space Marine. And that is not exactly lacking in the second one, but there's just something about it that the current operations and PvP, and even campaign, there's an itch there that none of those modes quite scratch. Then again, this could be something that is dictated by how popular the Horde mode is when they do implement it into the second one. So for the love of God, we need to play that a lot. I mean, I'm going to anyway, but you should as well, because we need more, right? Just generally flat out blanket statement, we need more. Something else is customization. Now don't get me wrong, there is a good amount of customization in Space Marine 2. I don't think they're slacking on that, and I think they're doing a good job with the stuff they have done, but it definitely feels like there is a very distinct separation between what the community would like to see and what perhaps Games Workshop would prefer. That is mostly down to the Firstborn Primaris divide. I mean, when you look at what we've got available currently, there are a few Firstborn bits here and there. We've got the Beaky Helmet, we've got is it the Errant Mark 8? I forget whether the Errant is a Mark 8 or not. Either way, we have one of the big grill helmets, but that's a couple of options which are fine, but there's not much else that's Firstborn related or Firstborn based. When we've got things like the bolters and so on, that's one thing, but when it comes to customizational armor pieces, there is a lack of options that harken back to what Space Marines used to be, as opposed to what they are now. There's very much a Primaris focus now, which makes sense because Games Workshop have been pushing Primaris non-stop since they were first released. And as we've said many times over the years, there's a good chance that Firstborn will just cease to exist at some point, and with the number of kits that have been retired for them, that looks increasingly more and more likely. But that also means that there's something of a divide between what Games Workshop, I feel, wants in the game and what the people playing want in the game. A good example being the Deathwatch armor. At the very start of the campaign, you are playing as a Firstborn Space Marine, and you have Deathwatch armor, the mark of which I can't remember off the top of my head, which is why I'm not saying it, but there's also things like having the pauldron covered in cloth, and there's things like the Black Templar helm that's got the cross that's been painted on the front of it. Options like that. Very fun, very thematic, very appropriate. But they're not part of the main saleable range when it comes to Games Workshop. They're not part of what they want to push when it comes to model sales. In fact, can you even... I'm going to do a quick test, just off the cuff here, because I've just had a thought. And I want to know if my hunch is correct. So, I've gone to Warhammer.com. If we go to Warhammer 40,000, as seen in Space Marine 2, it loaded an extra option there for a second. Let's have a quick glance. That's interesting. You can't see this, but that link is just to a search criteria for the store. So if you go to the store and type in, search the store, SM2 models, then you'll get this exact list of results. So what would we have? We've got Captain Phobos on, we've got Chaplain. Yeah, okay, we've got intercessors, heavy intercessors, jump pack intercessors. We've got Eliminators, Reavers, Veterans. We've got the Redemptor, obviously. Okay. Got Calgar. We've got most of what we see. Most of what we see in the operations there and in the campaign as a whole. Interesting, though, that I can't see any Deathwatch here. Do you find that interesting? I find that very interesting. Because, I mean, the Deathwatch are in it. They are the foundation of the campaign, in fact. Now, unless they have decided to simply stop selling any form of Deathwatch, which seems unlikely, and in fact, right now we can see Veterans, we can see Artemis, we can see the Black Star. I mean, there's not a lot of Deathwatch stuff, which is sad, but they're there. You just can't buy them in the context of Space Marine 2, which I think is a very good illustration of what I was just saying. I didn't really expect them to properly prove that. It was more just thinking aloud, but there you go. Things like that kind of increased freedom, is highly unlikely in the third entry for this series, but it would be nice. It would be very nice. It's just whether Games Workshop wants to relinquish that much control or allow that kind of advertising, which in a sense it also is, into the game. Because current sort of layout, current way they're doing things suggests probably not. That's really, I think, the three main things for me personally. But that's just me. What do you want to see? What do you not want to see? What is it that you are most looking forward to when it comes to a third installment of a franchise that, frankly, for a long time was dead and I wasn't sure we'd ever get the sequel at all? I mean, we're eating good, to be fair, regardless of how it turns out in the end, or what features they do and don't implement in Space Marine 2 and then in Space Marine 3 eventually. I feel like we're getting a good amount of mileage out of what was a non-existent franchise, a non-existent sequel. We're doing okay. We're doing all right. But what is it that you would like to see, not like to see? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you very much to Into the AM for sponsoring this video. Remember to use my link in the description down below for a chunky discount. Thank you very much for watching. Feel free to click all the things, especially that Into the AM link. It's a great way to support the channel. You get a t-shirt that you like or some other form of clothing that you enjoy, and I get something for sending you that way. I mean, it's a win-win, really. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you for the next one.